Heidi, I've already said nice things about your reporting, and I'll continue to say them. It's a mind-blowing piece in a lot of ways. In some ways, another one of these things that falls into the category of shocking but not surprising, given everything we've heard from Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, and others. Just, we've given an overview of it, but go a little deeper for us here and talk about some of the things that you uncovered in this reporting that you think are most problematic if you are one like the rest of us here who care about democracy in America.
Thanks so much, John. And I encourage everyone to go to the website and read it, because there's so much in there that I can't share in one live hit, but I will just boil it down for you here, which is that the goal here is to recruit and place a lot of election deniers into the actual architecture of the election administration system. These folks are being trained in what are called workshops by the RNC on how to contest voters, how to contest voting processes, and they're being given new tools that they haven't had before, including, John, a hotline, as well as a website that's being developed by a company named Zendesk. You may be familiar with it. If you've ever been online and wanted a live chat with a live operator on a retail site, they actually are working with that company so that folks who are in these centers can be in real-time contact with lawyers who are on the ground. They also, in the tapes, talk about recruiting or befriending district attorneys who will be sympathetic to this, about explaining to law enforcement this problem, which, by the way, was not a problem. We've been through this, fact-checked it many, many times about fraud and the lack of fraud, actually, in the Michigan election. But nevertheless, creating actual packets for law enforcement to reach out to law enforcement in advance. Some of the folks that they're working with this on are from the Amistad Project, John. And if you don't know them as a viewer, you should, because these folks were aligned with Rudy Giuliani in his attempts to overthrow the 2020 election. He called them a quote-unquote partner. Finally, it's really important to understand that they are mostly focusing on Democratic precincts here, John. And even if votes aren't overturned, because it's likely that they wouldn't be, they'd have to go through a court process, they'd have to go before a judge. The concern here is that they'd create enough chaos and enough of a legal haze in these Democratic precincts that it would create a pretext to toss this either to the Board of Canvassers, where they're also trying to place election deniers, or to the GOP-led legislature. And there are many states in the upper Midwest where this could be a similar tactic. This really kind of also is looking under the hood, so to say, of what Steve Bannon has called the precincts strategy. He's been urging people, John, on his podcast to become the worker bees of the election system. We know as to date, there's about 16 state directors on these types of projects.
Heidi, I want to ask you, I'll give you a chance to reply here to Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the Republican National Committee, who has a 7-part thread on Twitter attacking the piece. She says, today's story in Politico about the RNC election integrity operations shows a complete misunderstanding of the law, best practices, and election processes, while exposing an extreme bias, clearly distorting facts. I'm not going to read all 7 of the things in this Twitter thread, but the core of it is she gets to a place where she says, in states like Michigan, poll watchers are part of the law, a legal process to ensure transparency, ensure election integrity, et cetera, et cetera. It is literally how elections are run. A fact that is completely misunderstood by Politico. She says the RNC is following precedent, the law, and best practices. She says you should know better. I'll note Josh Holmes, an advisor to Mitch McConnell, weighs in the same way and says in the year of our Lord 2022, it appears Politico has discovered election day operations. I want to give you a chance just to reply to that, which is to both of those tweets. We're essentially saying the same thing. This is business as usual here, Heidi. This is what the law says you can do. This is basically what we always do. Grow up.
Interesting that they did not address the crux of the story, which are not poll watchers, they're poll workers. And there's a distinction, and they know that. And so a lot of the pushback that they gave to us in advance, which, by the way, we included their response in the story, had to do with poll watchers. That's what we had in 2020 with these poll contesters and poll watchers. This is very different because this is recruiting and placing people into these positions to have authority, such as election inspectors. If you listen to the tapes, they want people to take on these paid positions, and they're collecting the names. The party is collecting their names. They are placing them themselves into these precincts, deciding where they will go, and then holding these workshops to train them on how to contest voters. And you can see those slides in the story that clearly show that they are doing this type of training. They were barred from doing, I might mention, this type of work, any kind of election integrity work, John, since the 1980s. And the reason for that was because they entered a consent decree because they didn't want to go to court over accusations that they were going into minority districts and intimidating voters, including sending armed individuals to polling precincts. That was back in the 1980s. That consent decree finally lifted in 2018. So this is the first full cycle that they could do this type of work. And when I say this type of work, I just mean any kind of organizing, like around voter integrity in elections like this. And, you know, they're talking about poll watchers. The story here is about poll workers.
I want to ask you, Heidi, I'm going to ask you just for Matthew Seyfried or Seyfried is the RNC's election integrity director for Michigan. Seyfried or Seyfried?
Seyfried.
Seyfried. Okay, I'm going to play some sound here. I'm going to ask Joyce to talk about it on the other side. This is a guy who goes by in Michigan who has a title which is RNC election integrity director. Unfortunately, I think that's one of those things like jumbo shrimp that George Carlin referred to as a contradiction in terms. But let's play this sound here, and then Joyce will talk about it on the other side.
We are trying to recruit, truly, it's going to be an army, right? We are going to try to recruit lawyers. We're going to have more lawyers than have ever been recruited, because let's be honest, that's where it's going to be fought, right? We're going to have lawyers that work early to build relationships with different judges, so that when that happens, we're going to have lawyers that have relationships with the police chiefs in the different areas, with the police officers in the different areas, so that when that happens, those pre-existing relationships are already established, so that they can't lie.
So, Joyce, you just listened to that sound. I'd like to get your reaction to it and whether, what you think about what Matthew Seyfried, the RNC election integrity person in Michigan, is doing and saying there.
So this is pretty fascinating in light of your conversation with Heidi about Ronna McDaniel's defense of what the RNC is doing, because he's describing here the process that you might use with poll watchers. The conversation about police chiefs is a little bit shady, but both parties try to recruit lawyers who can go in and watch polls and be prepared if there are any contests or anything that needs to be reported. That's not what poll workers do. Poll workers, that's me walking into my precinct and having one of my neighbors check me in to vote. I've known her for a long time. I don't know how she votes, and her political party is not important, because her only job is to help check people in and make sure people who are entitled to vote get a ballot. That's what the Republican Party is trying to change here. This is about voter suppression. This is really a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing. They're coming in and they're using fraud as this cloak in an effort to try to suppress votes. It may not be as outlandish as the consent decree topic, which involved people who were armed standing outside of black polling places. That was a problem that we had in my state, in Alabama. But it will be a more grown-up, dressed-up type of voter suppression designed to keep individuals from voting. Maybe they won't have the right identification. Maybe their names won't appear on the polls. Maybe they won't be given accurate directions about how to cast a provisional ballot if they're not on the active voter rolls. There are a lot of different forms that this sort of suppression can take. And then ultimately, this specter of calling police and initiating criminal investigations, roping in district attorneys, this is nothing other than rank voter suppression in the works and an effort to undercut people's confidence in the integrity of elections so that Republicans can then throw contested outcomes in states that they need to win into legislatures. It's really horrible.